you take a small example, Boeing, 36,000 record breach was from an employee that was using a spreadsheet. He had this great template with a spreadsheet that does all these wonderful things. And as we all do, when we found something that works, what do? We tend to reuse it. And we reuse it over and over and over. Well, that employee had his whole, process automated, efficient, doing his job. And he saw that the spreadsheet that he's using is so awesome that he wanted to share it with his spouse. And he emailed the spreadsheet to his spouse. The spreadsheet had a hidden column that had 36,000 Social Security numbers of employees. Back to the question, do we know where our data live in our organizations? If we're focusing on an enterprise applications, an HR system, an ERP system, and that's where we're building all of our controls, someone exported a spreadsheet from one of their applications and emailed it to their wife, and they have a breach. Are you looking for these things? What are we focusing on? I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing all the other things, but do we know where our crown jewels are and monitoring the movement of that data? Another again, pervasive threat, question mark. 200 million records were lost because a report was generated, I believe it was from the voter registration, from the, I believe one of the major parties, where they generated a report and they failed to password protect it and they start sending it around. 200 million records were breached. Were they protecting the core system they had? Probably, but then the data got copied out and they lost track of where the data lives. Another example, AWS, as we start moving into the cloud, and that's, to a certain extent, that's starting to become a guarantee at some point in the future based on various licensing and things like that. The default configuration on AWS Bucket, and hopefully they changed it by now, I think Microsoft changed it immediately after they, on their Azure platform, was everyone has read permissions to the AWS buckets. How many of you knew that? So when you're creating a data storage bucket on AWS, the default configuration is everybody in the world has read access to it. And you can imagine that cable giant, Time Warner, would have known that before they moved into the clouds. Employees don't treat the cloud any different than data that you have on your premise. When they're putting things on your internal network share, they are automatically assuming that you have all the controls in place to protect it. They don't know what NTFS permissions will apply. They don't know what access list control it. They don't know who has access to it. They automatically assume that you're doing the right thing. And on the other opposite end of the spectrum, you have no idea what your users are putting in these files. So there's this assumption from both sides, and that's where issues occur. Now, when you complicate that by adding public access from the clouds, then you have someone putting potentially protected data on a publicly accessible share. We'll call the bucket a share for all intensive purposes. And now all of a sudden it's accessible everywhere. And you have a breach on your hands. Another AWS instance, hundreds of gigabytes were leaked from Accenture. And another AWS bucket that were all configured with the default permissions. The cloud included with default configuration will guarantee resulting in a breach. We have to actually scrutinize the cloud more. If anybody has heard, and I'm not picking on Amazon by any means, if anybody has dealt with any cloud vendors, you will always hear that security is a shared responsibility. What does that mean? We need to understand what shared responsibility mean. They're updating their operating systems. They're updating their network gear. I'm sure they're doing that. They have firewalls, but you're putting data. They don't know what you're putting there. And it's really not their responsibility as a part of protecting that data. It's really our job to know what we're putting out in the clouds. What they need is just a console to interact with your applications. Think WebEx. But they shouldn't be allowed to copy data in or copy data out of your infrastructure because that you can end up with a breach. If they have an infected machine, it can spread in your network, or they can simply export a database as a part of a application conversion project or something of that nature. And that database containing protected data could end up outside your network and you lost control of your data at that point. And remember, you can't lose what you don't have. One of the reason I actually picked this topic is one of my peers was working on an incident response in a major entertainment studio. They had an advanced persistent threat that got inside their organization. They weren't able to get them out. They made the mistake of actually using in-band communication with the incident response team. Sent an email. An email came with the contract of who they're hiring to do their IR to their legal team for approval. The attacker was so pervasive and invasive in their environment that they forwarded the email with the contract to their CISO, asking them, telling him, so you can't do the job and you're bringing in the big guns. That's how invasive attackers are. They are getting into more systems than we know about. So everything you really save can and will be used against you in the event of a breach. So try not to save it and protect your data.